Hi everyone, welcome to THT and welcome to my first in-depth deck tech video for set 3. And today I decided to show you a deck that you might not be expecting. It is a THRAWN blue deck. So I've already made a deck tech video about THRAWN blue, but this was way back and it was kind of like the attempt to make the best possible THRAWN deck. And it turns out, so there was just a THRAWN hard control blue. I think that if you wanted to play out control with blue, you were just better off playing Boba. Turns out Boba is now out of the way, officially being suspended by Fantasy Flight Games, which means that now there's more reason to play a THRAWN hard control deck. But even if you want to run THRAWN hard control, I believe that at the moment, Bosk still remains the best hard control leader in the game. And I've decided to go into a different direction with THRAWN into a more mid-range. This is why this deck is called a control mid-range. It is similar in the sense that the kind of deck that you might see with Kira or with Krennic, which means, yeah, it's a control deck. It has very, very powerful late game, has a lot of removal, a lot of way to heal. But as you can see here, we are playing a lot of units. So we have the ability to take on the aggression and putting the pressure on the opponent when the opportunity arises. So this is not a hard control deck, it is a soft control deck based on THRAWN. And I believe that this approach is better for THRAWN for two different reasons. The first reason is that I think that is exhaustibility, so we'll talk about this as we dive in depth into the leader, is more powerful in the context of a kind of in a proactive deck. The ability to exhaust enemy units, paying 1 resources, is more useful whenever you are actually putting pressure on the opponent. And the second reason is because we need a lot of units in play in order to make use of Foresight, which is the biggest upgrade that set 3 is adding to this particular deck, which we'll talk about very soon. So, first of all, let's talk a little bit about the list. As you can see, we are talking about a deck that has quite a few units, a majority of blue in order to make use of Lieutenant Charleston, try to slow down the game as possible with trading with units, producing card advantage using Foresight, and then later on in the game completely take over the game with cards like CAD Banes, Emperors, Supreme Leader SNOKE, and Avenger. And that's kind of like the idea of the whole deck. Is really a value-oriented control deck that is really going to try to grind out the opponent and has a lot of ways to stay alive against the most aggressive decks. So let's first jump into THRAWN. So basically THRAWN has 2 abilities. The first one is to be able to look at the top card of each player's deck, which is obviously really good because it allows you to basically know about half of the card that your opponent is going to draw. And the other advantage of this ability is to also know what you are going to draw, and obviously it makes it so we can use the ability knowing what card we can possibly tap down, and we have of course very strong combo with that ability. So really make the first ability, in my opinion, is really the strongest of the 2. The second ability allows you to exhaust enemy units by paying 1 as long as their cost is equal or less than the card revealed. And obviously we can reveal either player's top deck, so which means that the chances of being able to tap down units is relatively high. Obviously the bigger the unit, the more difficult it is to exhaust, but we have quite a few. It's still a fairly useful ability. It's not like amazing, it's not as good as it looks, but it is a fairly useful ability. And once again, I think this ability is better used. I've always kind of found this ability in the context of a hard control deck, and in hard control, this ability is not useful at all. Most of the time, you prefer to actually defeat a unit instead of exhausting it, even if you have the option to exhaust it. And but in the context of more of a kind of a mid-range deck, then what you can do is like you can tap down something for 1 and then develop a threat instead of just killing that threat is actually a very, very good alternative. So this deck makes much better use of THRAWN's strengths than any other THRAWN deck that I've built before or that I've seen. And we'll see why, as I'm referencing THRAWN's ability multiple times, I'm going to be showing the other cards. When it is deployed, it is a very large body of 3 to 9, which is very, very large. It's very difficult to kill. which is nice. 3 attack doesn't really do a whole lot, but in this case, be able to attack every turn, exhaust a unit for free is very, very impactful. So all in all, I think Thrawn is a much better leader than it used to for 2 major reasons. Is first of all, there's more cards that synergize with it in the set, and the other reason is because, of course, now that Boba is banned, there's less competition in that cunning villainy kind of shell. And without further ado, we're just gonna show you in my opinion, the best card of this deck, which is Foresight. So Foresight is ridiculous in this deck, like to the point where it's just insane. I think this card by itself really brings this deck to the next level. We're talking about a 1 resources card that gives +2 health to your unit, which is already not that bad if you compare this to Resilience, which gives +3 health for 1. And then obviously the ability allows you to, when the regroup phase starts, before drawing cards, name a card, then look at the top of your deck. If it's in the name card, you may reveal and draw it. So obviously you get to see the top card of your deck thanks to Thrawn at the beginning of the action phase. And then obviously, unless you draw cards throughout the turn, which you shouldn't be because there's no other ways in this deck to draw cards, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Then obviously you get to draw that card automatically. So that means that this card is basically a 0 +2 for 1 that draws your card every turn. And what is so ridiculous about this is that you can just play this card as your last on a unit that you know for a fact is going to survive, and you're guaranteed at least to redraw a card on top of a 0 +2. So already if the card was like +0 +2 and you draw a card for 1, that would already be very strong. But this card obviously is not going to draw you only 1 card, it's going to draw you 1 card every single turn. Guaranteed, without any workaround. So if you found this card was good in Yoda, it is so much better in Thrawn, because you don't need any setup. You don't need to lose initiative by using Yoda's ability in order to put the card on top. You don't have to do any of those shenanigans. It just flat out just draws you a card every turn, which is absolutely ridiculously strong. It's so strong because I know the card draw is not necessarily the most important thing in Star Wars Unlimited, but when it comes to for such a low cost and with no particular build around, you just have to have Thrawn as your leader, then the card becomes just completely nuts. You basically never run out of gas. The +2 health makes the card that you've equipped this with extremely difficult to take out. It's just strong amount of value. It's an amazing card. You put this on your leader, and Thrawn becomes very difficult to kill and draws your card every turn. It's so incredibly strong. Moving on, we got Greedo. Greedo is one of the best 1-drop in. Still believe this is the best 1-drop in the game, and in this deck it is so much stronger than in any other deck you've seen before, for 2 reasons. The first reason, obviously, because we get to see what is on top of the deck. We can know in advance whether or not Greedo is going to deal the 2 extra damage or not. That means we can trade Greedo into a 5 health unit, knowing for sure that he's going to kill it, which is a very big deal. Another benefit of Greedo is obviously the fact that it can be played on turn 1 alongside Foresight. So you play this as a 3/3 for 2, basically on turn 1, and you get to draw a card right away. That is just a very strong thing to do. This is the best opening the deck could possibly do, is Greedo, then Foresight. Another cool thing is that we are playing 3 copies of McClunky. Obviously Greedo is good with McClunky because you can very easily bounce it back into your hand, deal 3 damage to something, and then replay the Greedo afterwards. Other 2-drop that is obviously very strong in this deck is obviously Bazine. Bazine is going to be very strong against those control decks that can have like Super Laser Blast or just very powerful late game card. Getting those super powerful late game card out of the way so we can play our own super powerful cards and not them being killed or counters is huge. Then it is also Smuggle, and it is Underwhelm, which means that you can combine it with McClunky. Bazine is just amazing in this deck. Also worth notice that with Bazine, with Thrawn, we get to see what your opponent is going to be drawing from the Bazine, which is another little added bonus that sometimes. So it makes it so sometimes when you have to make a decision or whether you make your opponent discard a card, you know what card they are going to be drawing from the Bazine, which means that you have a better understanding of whether this discard is actually a good idea or not. Because sometimes you do discard a card with Bazine, but you'll be like, oh, I don't know, maybe my opponent is going to draw something even better than what I discarded. And at least with this, it is something that is unlikely to be the case. So moving on to Mercenary Gunship. So Mercenary Gunship is here for two reasons. It is a unit that is going to be contesting the space arena, trading with the opponent's space units, and it is also Underworld for McClunky. Then we got General Grievous. So General Grievous, I'm not entirely 100% sure that's the right 3-drop for the deck. Maybe it's going to depend on the meta, whether 3/5s is a better sightline as a 4/4. You could easily imagine playing like Toro or even the Boba Fett Disintegrator instead. So this is not entirely set in stone whether one of the two cards is better. It's going to depend on the meta. Right now there's no meta, it's very chaotic. So it's going to depend on the meta whether Grievous or whether Boba Fett Disintegrator is going to be better. It's going to depend on which stat line is currently more interesting, but we need, of course, a good 3-drops that can trade with the opponent units and also put pressure on the opponents, and Grievous does this just fine. Then we got the Client. The Client is good in this deck because at the same time it is a unit that is going to put pressure on the opponent, that is a good carrier of Foresight because he's very difficult to kill, and obviously against aggro, the ability to heal, to the bounty and the ability to heal is going to be very, very attractive. So that's a very strong card as well for the deck. Then we got Lieutenant Charleston, which is another great star of the deck. The majority of the deck is blue, so it's very easy to make Charleston a 6/6. Obviously, Foresight makes it that you can draw cards early on in the game, making it more likely to be able to make Charleston a 6/6 as well. So basically, there's kind of two approaches you can go for the deck. You can either play a 1-drop and put like a Foresight on it to draw a bunch of cards, or you can decide to simply skip your turn 1, play a Paradox on turn 2, classic control opening, and then play Charleston a 6/6 as well. You can also play a 2-drop, then on turn 3, play a 2-drop on turn 1, then play Foresight on turn 2, and then by turn 3, when you play Charleston, you also have 6 cards in hand. So there's multiple ways to make this Charleston 6/6, and we have so many blue cards in the deck. Most of the cards that are not blue are actually early game units like Bazine, McClunky, Greedo, and those cards will be either played or resourced early on in the game, which will leave us with only blue cards, which makes the Charleston really easy to push into a 6/6. Then we get Lum Pike. So we actually like Smuggle in this deck because it's another way to make value and make card advantage without drawing us cards. Drawing us card is actually counter synergistic with Foresight, because if we got Foresight and we draw the card that we saw, then we no longer know what is on top of the deck, whether Foresight is unlikely to give us a card. So that's why we prefer Smuggle over it. Lum Pike is one of the best Smuggle cards in set 2, as far as like unit is concerned. 4/6 for 4, very good stats. Giving a shield is often an upside because we give a shield to something and then we just kill that thing with a removal. Very easy to use and very powerful. So that is, and obviously we can smuggle it. So moving on now to the next card is Cargo Jugernaut. Cargo Jugernaut, this card from set 1, which many expected to just be kind of like a draft card, ended up being such a powerhouse. We know already how good it is in Crowning Midrange. It's the perfect card for the set for this deck. We play lots of blue units. Units that are very difficult to get rid of because they are either shielded on their very high health or they're boosted by Foresight. And Cargo Jugernaut just comes in and very likely will heal us 4, as well as putting a 4/6 shielded on the battlefield. Very annoying to deal with for control because it does not die to takedown, it doesn't die to slay the dragon, and it has a shield. So it's actually very difficult to get rid of. I think it's a card that is very well positioned in the current landscape of the game. It is good against aggro because of the heal. It's good against control because of how annoying it is to get rid of. So just a perfect card for the deck. Then we are reaching the point of the game where we are looking for late game inevitability, and as far as like this is concerned, CAD Bane is a very powerful tool that allows you to swing games completely in your favor by getting rid of a bunch of units at once. So CAD Bane is definitely a card that is gonna one of the weakness of Cunning Villainy in the previous sets is that Cunning Villainy did not have access to a lot of very powerful late game cards, but CAD Bane kind of fixes that. It gives us a huge body that is going to be kind of completely capture a bunch of units. And the good news is that, yeah, we can actually make your opponent rescue those units, but that's okay because you get to draw a bunch of cards and then you get to kill those units by one as they come back, because we have removals to kill whatever comes out of CAD Bane. And obviously we have a 7/7 body, which is extremely powerful, and then so often we can just leave in and just not attack anything. It's also another play you can make. So not to be played in any situation. It's definitely a card that sometimes can feel a little bit situational. That's why we only play 2 copies of it. But it is undeniably a very powerful late game card for the deck that can solve a lot of very complicated situations. It's the kind of card that is not necessarily the most amazing all the time, but when it is good, it will win you games. And that's for that reason alone, it deserves spots in the list. More late game, obviously, Supreme Snoke. Just a very great tool against aggro whenever this is in play. Aggro is kind of like, it becomes a lot more difficult for aggro to close out the game. The deck can sometimes suffer against decks that go really wide, because obviously we don't, we have mostly like single target removal. So Snoke kind of fixes that problem for us, even though it comes into play relatively late, but we have plenty of ways to heal, plenty of removal, plenty of ways to delay the game to reach that point. Obviously, other inevitability late game tool, Avenger is obviously another great one. One of the great thing about super late game units in this deck is that we are drawing so many cards, we're pretty much not running out of gas. We're going to be putting threats after threats against control. And so it's more likely that card like Avenger or Snokes are more likely to survive because we've put a lot of threats earlier, things that have Foresight on them that your opponent's going to have to get rid of. Which means that as those big units comes out, they are less likely to be taken a removal right away. Now let's talk about the removal part of the deck. First, we got McClunky, which is our early game removal. Good synergy with Bazine. We play loads of underworld units, kind of kill something, then replay the units. Kind of flexible removal. It's not as good in this deck as it would be in a Boba deck, but I still think this card is going to be a great way to stabilize the early stage of the game and have early game removal, especially against aggro. Moving on, we got obviously powered Darkside. I think it's impossible to be playing a blue-black deck if you're not running this, so this card is just too good. Moving on, we got 2 copies of FERDRAGON to get rid of our larger units. We are playing a control deck at the end of the day, so we need removals. We play 3 copies of Takedown. Is that 3 copies? Yeah, it is 3 copies of Takedown. I think Takedown, as Sabine is going to be such an important part of the meta, Takedown is going to be a very, very important card. 3 copies of Vigilance. So Vigilance might be a surprise to some of you because we're not really playing a hard control deck, but I think that the ability to kill a unit and heal at the same time is very important. So it's like against aggro to kind of like stabilize the game, and also giving shield to our units is also fairly relevant in this deck, as once again you want to put a shield on our unit that have Foresight. We have loads of Sentinel units we're happy to shield as well, so just Vigilance happens to be a pretty solid card in this deck as well. 1 copies of Rival's Fall. It's difficult to know in the upcoming meta which leader is going to see play. Maybe there's going to be like some super expensive leaders that are going to require an answer. With the main reason you weren't playing Rival's Fall in the previous set is because Boba with Boba armor, it was a great solution to Boba with Boba armor. In this set, it's a little bit less kind of clear, or whether you want to play Rival's Fall or not. We play 1 copy. Depending on how the meta develop, we might play more at the expense of the FERDRAGON. It's not entirely set in stone yet. We got 1 copies of Super Laser Blast. The deck is pretty mid-rangey, but Super Laser Blast we're still playing a relatively late game focused deck, and there's going to be some situation where we are very happy to have that as a card. A one-off can really kind of freak out the opponent and can really take the opponent by surprise. I believe it's a good card to have as a one-of. Now let's talk about the sideboard. So in the sideboard, we got 3 copies of B1 Security Team, which is going to be our main kind of anti-aggro early game units to kind of trade with those Battlefield Marine, kind of protect ourselves against Battlefield Marine. I think the card is pretty solid. It is probably better than Cloud Rider, even though it is not entirely kind of sure. I'm still kind of testing whether this is better than Cloud Rider or not. I feel like most of the time B1 Security should be better. Cloud Rider is slightly better with McClunky. So it's still kind of up in the air whether this is the right card or not. No Good to Be Dead is another excellent card against aggro. Usually you don't want to be playing a card that doesn't provide you with card advantage unless you're playing a mid-range deck or unless you're playing if you're playing a control deck. But sometimes against aggro, there's the tempo boost that the tempo it just gives you a lot of time to process and to develop your own game plan against decks that are extremely fast. Like for example, your opponent's gonna play like a Dark Saber on a Sabine. You play No Good to Me Dead. You're very happy about this, and you put yourself in a very good situation. We also got some anti-control unit. Regional Governor is one of those. Normally not a big fan of Regional Governor in a deck that doesn't play many units, because then Regional Governor just becomes a removal magnet. But in this deck, we play so many units that are going to be requiring answer from the opponent that I feel like Regional Governor becomes a lot better. And when Regional Governor comes into play, we can name the problematic late game card that we happen to be facing at this point in time, and that can just be very effective. Also, something to note with Regional Governor is that there's a synergy with THRAWN, where we know what the opponent is going to draw in hand. We can play Regional Governor and name whatever card we saw. And we got a 3rd copy of FERDRAGON in the sideboard for the relevant matchup. So that's it for the deck. As you can see, I think the deck has a lot of strong synergy with THRAWN. Notably, as I said, the real all-star of this deck is Foresight. Foresight is, in my opinion, the best card of the deck. And then obviously the rest is just a very solid mid-range control shell with loads of blue cards, makes Charleston very powerful. Something I forgot to mention, but the reason why we play Grievous over Boba Fett's Disintegrator is because Grievous is blue, so more blue cards is better for Charleston, basically. Anyway, let's take a look now into so in terms of sideboard plan, I don't have any specific sideboard plan, because obviously we are still very early on in the meta, so it's not entirely clear what you want to be playing in terms of like early game units. In terms of like sideboard plan, I would say B1 No Good to Me Dead and B1 Security Team is obviously anti-aggro, while Regional Governor FERDRAGON is more of an anti-control kind of shell. So we kind of have those 2 different aspects. I think Regional Governor is going to be helpful against Han as well. We can name card like Tech or DJ if we don't want to be DJ combo. This deck is relatively vulnerable to that DJ Thon combo, which is even more reason to be playing Takedown, 3 copies of Takedowns, because it helps against the DJ Tech combo and that kind of thing. So I think the deck is very solid, and in my opinion, it is a great way. It's a kind of a good example of a deck that I think would have suffered immensely. I think a deck like this would have not been very good against Boba. And now that Boba is out, this is kind of deck that can definitely, this sort of mid-range deck that appears that can be very powerful. Let's talk now, let's do a little bit of Mulligan. So to start with our first hand here, this is a pretty decent hand. I mean, it depends against what you're playing. I think against aggro is pretty solid. You got turn 1 Greedo, turn 2 General Grievous. This hand would be so much better with a Foresight, but it's still pretty decent. Against control, get a turn 1 Bazine. You might even go Greedo here. It's a very solid hand. I would definitely keep that hand. I probably want to resource the Bazine and resource the Avenger. It's a bit too early to be having an Avenger. Or maybe you want to resource the Vigilance if you're not playing against aggro. Vigilance can be useful even against control, that the Melan aspect can be a thing. By the way, something I wanted to say, if right now I didn't really take this into account because I don't think hard control is going to be something that's going to be very relevant in this meta, but then if you're playing against hard control, you can totally play some Bounty Hunter crew in your sideboard, and then suddenly your deck can be very strong even against hard control, so that's something to bear in mind. Okay, next hand, this is also kind of very similar hand, a turn 1 Greedo, turn 2 Grievous, turn 3 Shalsen. This Shalsen is probably going to be 5/5. which is fine. 5544 Sentinel is perfectly acceptable. If we do happens to be drawing a Foresight, we'll be able to put this back into a 6/6. So very solid hand as well. Okay, this hand is really good as well. We got a Greedo, McClunky, turn 1, then the client, Charleston, which is going to be probably a 5/5 in this particular case. Yeah, very solid hand. And then moving on now to this next hand. Mercenary Gunship turn 1, the client turn 2. That's a complete fine hand with the McClunky going on. Not probably the worst hand that we've seen so far, but a decent hand nevertheless. And here this next hand is obviously, this hand is a mulligan, just there's so much going on. And then one last hand here. Okay, this hand is pretty decent. Either turn 1 Gunship or turn 1 Greedo, depending on where the opponent goes. Turn 2 Power Darkside. Then we're going to need to draw something if we want to not be playing anything, but that's still a pretty decent hand. So thank you so much for following that video. The deck list is going to be on the description of the video. And let me know if you enjoy this deck, and if you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe.